Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Saturday, February 28th, 2026, and I am coming at you live from a subterranean land of lush greenery where the sun never quite shines. Because today we're talking about a couple ancient mysteries. Um, this one's called History's Mysteries, I think. I like to have a nice rhyming scheme every once in a while. So, History's Mysteries. Our first one, it is kind of a mystery. It could just be like a straight up legend. Our second one is a little bit more of a theory, conspiracy theory type of thing, an ancient conspiracy theory. Usually those involve aliens and, that sort of thing, demons, the angels, the Nephilim. This isn't that. This is a little bit more of like a concrete conspiracy theory. Or not concrete necessarily, but like real world, tangible. There's no aliens. God's not really involved in this thing. Uh, Not really. I guess if you're a Christian, then God's involved in everything, but no direct link to the big man upstairs. Um, so yeah, we got a mystery, kind of a mystery, maybe a myth, maybe a legend, although there does seem to be a lot of it doesn't give off myth vibes, I'll say. Our first one doesn't. Our second one, conspiracy theory, we're going to be seeing what exactly was going on in ancient times. Although we're not getting super ancient today, we're staying between like 1000 AD to like 1500 AD. That's our time range for our ancient mysteries, because you don't want to get too ancient with it, right? Because when you get too ancient with it, you have like some Roman historian talking about how an army of 10 million people fought an army of, 15 million people or whatever. And then you look at the historical, archaeological evidence that we have from back then, and it's like there weren't even that many people on the planet at that time. So, right? So you don't want to get too too ancient with it. You want to keep it around this time period when it's like, were people a little bit irrational? Yes, but were they completely irrational? No. Like we had algebra back then. Like we, as in humanity. I don't know if like Europe had algebra at that time, but the Muzzies figured out algebra during that time. So, yeah, some nice. I don't know what that would be like, not maybe late antiquity. I don't know when no, late antiquity is like the 800s. Yeah, I'd say this is like Middle Ages type of stuff, like before the discovery of the New World. Maybe that's actually what our conspiracy, theory, whatever you want to call it, gets into. Our historical theory, I guess we'll call it. Although there is some conspiracy involved in it, it's not just like speculation and looking at archaeological evidence or whatever. There is a little bit of government conspiracy in our second theory. But that's the time frame we're talking about here. Post like Roman Empire, even though that was like 450 AD. Middle Ages. All right, let's just call it Middle Ages. I know there's some dweeb out there that's going to be like, technically, and it's like, and the other thing about a lot of those terms is that they really only apply to like Europe, right? Because during the fall of the Roman Empire or whatever, I don't know if this is exactly true, but other places were thriving when Europe wasn't, and Europe was thriving when other places weren't, right? So they'll call it like the Golden Age or whatever, and it'll be like, yeah, it was a golden age in Europe, but in China, 50 million people died due to famine, plague, and war. Although with China, that's just a constant for that place. Constantly in China, 50 million people are dying. Every time China makes the smallest decision, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a war, just the smallest decision about anything. Like today, if China switched from the metric system to the imperial system, is that what it's called? Whatever it's called, the American way of doing things, miles, feet, all that shit. If China switched from metric to American, I I I can I can pretty confidently say at least 100 million people would die. Right? Like that's just China's history really as a whole. It's like the smallest decision. It's like we decided to start farming a new type of rice in like one province in southern China or whatever, and then it's like, and then 30 million people died. It's just the way things go over there. It's also the way things go with communism, but we're not going to talk about that Every time a country switches to communism, it's like, all right, well, that's 10 million dead. Just guaranteed even if the country itself isn't that horrible, it's still like just 10 million people die immediately. It's just a guaranteed when you switch over to communism. It's just a fact. It's a fact of life. It's like when you start your car, it's going to make a noise, right? Obviously. When you switch to communism, 10 million people are going to die. It's just going to happen even if the country doesn't have 10 million people, somehow 10 million people are going to die. Um, yeah, mysteries today. It's the theme of this week's episode. Uh, we are going to talk about some more modern, contemporary interpretations of these mysteries. The second one is actually a theory that was kind of brought up in modern times. But the first one, I don't know. They have some lame explanations for the first one. The first one does give off a little bit more of like a fairy tale type of vibe, but not really. Like I said, the content of it seems fairy tale-ish, but a lot of the things around it are not fairy tale-ish at all. They're not like extravagant or um, frivolous or like whatever. It's not like that. Um, but yeah, so I guess we'll get into our first mystery that we have here for our history's mysteries. So this one is the Green Children of Woolpit. So at harvest time during the reign of King Stephen, who this is Stephen de Blois, who was the last Norman king of England. Kind of ties into our previous episode, but we're not getting into that. We're not getting into the intricacies of the Anglo-Saxon versus the English monarchy versus the Norman monarch. We're not getting into that this episode, but this is kind of a tie-in from our last episode, a little cameo here. King Stephen de Blois from 1135 to 1154. This is harvest time, and some villagers from Woolpit, which is a town in England, discovered two children with green skin near a wolf pit. Wolf pit. So Woolpit, I guess back in when they spoke Old English or Proto English or whatever it's called, they called wolves wolves. I don't know, because the town is called Woolpit because of all the wolf pits they had there, and obviously a wolf pit is what it sounds like. It's a pit where you put fucking wolves, right? They would trap them there and like kill them and stuff like that, so they didn't eat their cattle. I didn't know England ever had wolves like that, but I guess they did because they had these wolf pits and they found two children with green skin just like kind of near one, not inside it. This isn't a green children pit, this is a wolf pit, so the green children didn't get trapped in the pit, but they were found near the pit during harvest time. And the during harvest time is going to be important when we talk about um our contemporary theories regarding this either as a legend or as a real historical event. So that's going to be a little bit important a little bit later on. So they find these kids. It doesn't seem like they were full green, like full aliens with big black eyes and huge foreheads green. It was more of like a green tint, you know, like a nice like when you go outside sometimes before a rainstorm or like right after a rainstorm or whatever, and there's some atmospheric phenomena and everything looks green but not like fully green. You guys know what I'm talking about? Not like Amazon jungle green, but like stained glass green is how I would interpret the green tint to these children's skin. So once again, not like a full fairy tale thing. Like if these motherfuckers were like, yeah, these guys were baby shit green, right, or like baby food, peas green, then okay, maybe we could say this is a fairy tale. But they were like, nah, they were just a little bit tinted, just a little bit tinted, which is yeah, that's pretty. I don't know why people don't do that with their windows. Like everyone gives their car windows like a black tint, but what if you want like a green tint or like a rose tint? Just so when you're driving everything looks cooler. I don't know. I don't know why they always go black, but anyway, they find these green tinted children near a wolf pit during harvest time during the reign of King Stephen the Blois. And also the we are going to talk a little bit about the like ethnic history and like the different ethnic groups of England and stuff like that. So it's important to remember that King Stephen was a Norman king in England. And before that, it was the Anglo Saxons who ruled England. So that's going to be a little bit important. But anyway, so the two children, there was one boy and one girl, and the pair did not speak English. They were taken in by Richard de Caulnay, who claims they refused food for several days. So, once again, kind of like not really fairy tale ish, because I don't know, I'm imagining almost like a goblin. Like if this was a fairy tale, if this really was a fairy tale, I'd imagine you'd be like, yeah, and they came in and they ate my chairs or whatever because goblins really like eating chairs. But he's like, no, they didn't eat. They were kids and they were probably pretty scared and confused about what was happening. So I'm just kind of trying to justify the fact that this is an actual ancient mystery as opposed to a fairy tale that's been like taken as fact or misinterpreted or whatever. So this guy Richard de Calne, he's one of the villagers around there. I think he's like a high class villager. He's not like a peasant or whatever. And a lot of the people that we're going to talk about, or I guess we're not really going to talk about them, but a lot of the people around this were like royals and historians, not like just regular everyday peasants. They were higher class people who could read and write and stuff like that. That doesn't necessarily mean that uh they don't have like ignorance or that they're immune to like fairy tales and fantastical ideas and stuff like that. It's just a little bit of context for the situation. So he brings these kids in, they don't speak any English, and they're not eating any food. They don't. This is very funny. Like the villagers and the historians and the guys, like everyone around the situation during that time were just like, yeah, they were green and they didn't eat. Like they don't provide a fantastical like fairy tale explanation for any of these things. They're just like, we found some green kids, they didn't eat, is what it is. They're not like, oh, it was a goblin or oh, it was like a ghoul or a fairy or some shit like that. They present it as fact, which to me does lend itself to me believing that this isn't, a myth from that time. Although the contemporary explanations are that it was a myth, but I mean, I don't know. Like back then they were providing fairy tale explanations and shit like that for literally everything. Like everything was because of God or ghosts or spirits or fairies or elves or gnomes or whatever back then, right? So for them to not apply that logic to this situation lends itself, in my opinion, to being more true. So they're there at this guy's house for a few days, and eventually they ate after coming across some raw broad beans, which they ate ravenously and eagerly, and eventually they adapted to normal food. So it don't really exactly know the timeline here. Like, did they adapt to normal food after a few weeks? I don't really know what's going on, but they eat these raw broad beans, and this is going to be important for our contemporary explanation later. But I don't know. I guess broad beans are a type of bean that they typically only ate cooked because they noted that they ate the raw broad beans and they munched them like motherfuckers, dude. They were going crazy on these things. Didn't eat any bread or meat or anything like that, but they really like these broad beans. So they eat these broad beans pretty ravenously and eagerly. It said it wasn't that they were eating ravenously because they were hungry necessarily, because they had been offered food before, right? But they don't eat until they come across these raw vegetables, essentially. Or I guess are beans vegetables? No, they're seeds, right? Whatever. They only ate plants. So that's important. And they ate them quite eagerly. Like they really liked them. It's kind of a mixture of being hungry but also liking the food in and of itself, right? It would be like if you didn't eat for 5 days and then someone offered you a ribeye. It's like if someone offered you saltines after not eating for 5 days, you'd probably eat them pretty ravenously. But if someone offered you a sirloin after not eating for 5 days, you'd probably eat it ravenously, but also like really enjoy it and really be like, God damn, this is fucking delicious. And that's what these kids did, but with raw broad beans. So they eat the food. Once again, timeline not exactly clear here, but when the villagers eventually decide to baptize both of them, but the boy who was the younger of the pair was sickly during the time and died shortly before or after the baptism. So they're just playing it safe here, essentially, with the baptism. They're just like, we don't know if these kids are Catholic or not, but we're going to baptize them just in case. Maybe they're demons or something like that. And so when we dunk them in the holy water or put the holy water on them, it'll burn. This was a smart decision by them. You know, people in ancient times made a lot of dumb, irrational decisions, but within the context of God and demons and, you know, all that stuff being real, I would say this is a pretty solid one. Because if they've already been baptized, then it's like, then they just got another round of it. You know what I mean? Nothing. I don't think baptism is one of those things where you can do it too many times. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not exactly 100% familiar with the Catholic doctrine around baptism, but I'd say play it safe here. I'd say God would understand. Even if you aren't allowed to get baptized twice, I would say God understands this situation. But anyway, this boy dies before he ever uh, learns to speak English or anything. Because remember, these kids don't speak any English. It doesn't say like what they talked like at all. Like if it was close to English or if they talked at all. It doesn't say anything about that. But they just did not speak English, and so this boy dies before he ever learns to speak English. But he maybe gets baptized, so maybe he did make it to heaven. Although I do think the Catholics believe you can make it to heaven without getting baptized. But once again, playing it safe here, making sure these kids aren't demons, and making sure that if they do die, that they get up to heaven. It's a pretty smart move by the villagers. And so the girl who her name was maybe Agnes, so we're just going to call her Agnes. So the girl Agnes eventually lost her green color and learned English, and she explained she came from St. Martin's Land, where the sun always shone like dusk and dawn and everything was green. So the sun is always like shining just like a little bit. Apparently that's what twilight is. I didn't know that. I always thought twilight was the middle of the night. That's midnight. I'm stupid. Right? Obviously midnight is the middle of the night, but I thought twilight was always like super dark. No, twilight is like in between dark and light. So the sun's it's there, but it's never like quite fully out. And that's kind of what England sounds like to me as a whole. It's just always that we know the sun is there, but it's never like fully light outside. And also, everything being green sounds like England or Ireland. Um, but she calls this place that she's from St. Martin's Land. And that's another important thing that we got to remember later on when we're talking about our contemporary explanations for this situation. But that's where she says she's from. She doesn't she doesn't like specify where it is or like how far it is from the village from Woolpit. She doesn't explain any of that shit. She just like, I come from St. Martin's Land. It's always green, and the sun's never like quite fully out. It's always on the horizon, basically, is what she's saying here. And everything's green. Sounds like a pretty cool place to live. As a white person, I really do love the sun, but obviously the sun is a little bit, it's kind of my enemy, a little bit, you know, being a honky. But this does sound like a decent place to live. St. Martin's Land is what she calls it. So she later explained that her and her brother were out herding their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise and suddenly found themselves by the wolf pit. Um, and so this place, Woolpit, it's near this abbey, which if you don't know, an abbey is basically like a monastery. But I think nuns also live there. I think it's like monks, nuns. It's like a holy place. And so they have these church bells. And one of the villagers from this time, I don't remember which one it was. It was one of those high class dudes I was talking about. He was like, oh, the loud noise they heard was the ringing of the bells at the monastery. And so they heard those bells and they, I guess, abandoned the cattle and decided to follow them and eventually found themselves near this wolf pit. But the way the girl describes it is almost like a hypnotic type of thing, where she just like knocked out and wakes up near the wolf pit, essentially, which provides another explanation, not a fun explanation, but they're near a church, and we all know priests especially get up to some fun with the children. Not fun, but they're fond of them. They're fond of children. Obviously, not all of them, but they have been known to do such things, at least in contemporary times. And they're near this monastery, and they mysteriously wake up, just don't remember anything. I'm not saying the priest did some Bill Cosby shit to these kids, especially during medieval times. I'm sure the priests were fucking adult men and women and just like hiding it from the public. But anyway, that's my explanation. None of the contemporary explanations are like a priest or a nun came out and raped the kids. None of them are saying that. I'm saying with look, everyone does always make the joke about Catholic priests being pedophiles. Turns out they aren't pedophiles at much a higher rate, but they do hide it a lot better, because they have that whole system around them. But anyway, it's a possible explanation. Look, some green kids showed up in the middle of a fucking English village and they didn't speak English. So we just gotta look at everything. All right, can I say that? Can I say we just gotta look at every possibility, every scenario that could have led up to these children magically waking up next to this wolf pit? I say we look at them all, just to be 100% sure. And so, yeah, that's her explanation for it. Heard a loud noise when they were out herding their father's cattle, wake up near this wolf pit, like right next to it, apparently. And so, one of the villagers, it was one of those high-class dudes I was talking about, claims the children became lost in a cave after following the cattle and were guided out by the bells of the nearby abbey. So one person said that the loud noise the kids heard when they were herding the cattle was the bells of the abbey, and then this other dude is like, no, they got lost in a cave and then they heard the bells of the abbey. I don't know why he added that extra detail about the cave. It kind of is gonna come into our explanation regarding the fairy tales and stuff like that. But he says they got lost in a cave first, then they heard the bells of the abbey, as opposed to just herding the cattle, hearing the bells, walking over, and being near the wolf pit. So that's his explanation for it. Went in a cave first. I don't know much about cows. I don't think they're big fans of caves, though. So I don't know if this is the best explanation. I do know elephants. There's a group of elephants in Kenya, I believe, that live in like a cave. They don't live in the cave like full time, but they do go in this cave a lot to like eat salt. So I don't know. Maybe that was a thing also in the Middle Ages of England, where they would take the cows to the cave so that the cows could get salt. I don't. Just pure speculation, pure guessing here, but why else would cows go into a cave? They live in England, so it's not like they're trying to get out of the rain or whatever. They're clearly used to the rain. If you live in England, you're used to fucking rain. So I don't know why these cows would go into a fucking cave and why they would go so deep in that the kids would get lost in the cave. But anyway, that's his explanation for it, and it's going to be important for our fairy tale explanation later. So this chick Agnes, she ends up growing up, normal skin, learns English, all that stuff, and she worked as for one of the villagers that like found her and took care of her as a kid. She worked as an impudent house servant for many years before marrying a royal official and moving away from Woolpit. So yeah, once again, there's nothing really fantastical about that. And this is all from a historian who lived around that time, and he was just like, yeah, she just grew up, worked as a house servant. She was a little bit of a bitch when she was working as a house servant. But this is the Middle Ages in England, so a woman being impudent or whatever, that could just mean she stood up for herself one time, right? That could be what that means. And then she just married like not even a noble, just like a regular, like definitely a high class dude, but not a member of nobility or anything like that. I think they said he was a he worked with the clergy and with the royalty and stuff like that, almost like a bureaucrat, right? Is what she ends up marrying and just moves away from Woolpit. And that's kind of the end of her life story. Once again, nothing, even from their sources, even from these old ancient sources, nothing fantastical about any of this. I mean, the explanation of how they ended up getting there, I guess, could be a little bit fantastical, but it's not like, oh, they were carried there by an angel or by a dragon or whatever. It's just like, no. They heard some bells, followed the bells, and it was near this wolf pit. And that's how they ended up here, right? Nothing fairy tale-ish about that explanation at all. No ghouls, no goblins, no knights in shining armor, no ladies of the lake. Just woke up next to this wolf pit. And so none of the villagers, like I was saying, or historians of the time bothered explaining or investigating anything about it because they basically just thought it was a waste of time. And once again, this just makes it seem more real in my mind. Is just the fact that they really did find these kids and they were like, fuck it, dude, we found some green kids. Like, we don't even know what lives in the ocean. How the fuck are we gonna explain what's going on with these green kids that we that we found near our village, right? They don't. They're not. They're not blaming it on anything. They're not being like, oh, these kids were gnomes or shapeshifters or anything like that. They were just like, no, we found some kids. They were green. Then they turned not green and they ended up speaking English and we baptized them and all that stuff. So they were just green kids. It seems very, very real to me. But it's like, why were they green? Why were they in England and not speaking English? That's the whole mystery aspect of it to me. The mystery isn't whether it happened or not. To me, in my opinion, I would say pretty firmly that this happened, or that something pretty similar to what these ancient people, or not ancient, but medieval people described, actually happened. That's that's not the mystery. The mystery is like, how the fuck did they get here? Why don't they speak any English? Why are they green? That to me is the mystery about this whole situation. Like I said, I don't think it's a fairy tale or anything like that. We're going to look at some fairy tale explanations for it, but I personally don't think it's a fairy tale. I do think they found some kids who might have been green, might not have been green. You know what I mean? I'm colorblind personally, so sometimes yellows and greens, not really yellows and greens, but for me it's more like purple, red, brown, blue, like all of that stuff can kind of get mixed up a little bit. But there are people who are colorblind in a way where their yellows and greens get a little bit mixed up and stuff like that. And sometimes yellow looks like green, and that's going to be important. But I do think they found some green kids near a wolf pit who didn't speak English. I fully believe that story. Maybe not fully green. Maybe they're over exaggerating the greenness of these children, the lushness of their skin. But I do think they found some off color kids. That's how we'll put it. Found some off color kids who didn't speak English near a wolf pit. Crazier things have happened, is all I'm saying. You know what I mean? We've been to the moon. I don't think it's that crazy to be like a person could end up being green. There's a blue dude out there. There's literally a dude who is blue out there. There's multiple blue people that live in our country. If you've ever seen that documentary, The Cult of Mother God or whatever, it's on HBO. It's fucking hilarious. It's one of the funniest things. I heard Matt and Shane talk about it on that podcast, and so I watched it. It's fucking hilarious. This lady's like a severe alcoholic, schizophrenic who drinks colloidal silver, which is what turns people blue, and she ends up dying due to her severe alcoholism. She gets like cirrhosis or some shit, and she dies. And all the schizophrenics around her, because they're all in some sort of manic episode, they end up mummifying her. And then you see this police body cam footage, and they pull up, and it's just like this bright blue chick who's like shriveled into a fucking raisin. And all these schizophrenics being like, don't touch her, don't touch her, she's just resting right now. And she's literally like falling apart. And then this is the crazy part about this documentary. So this group, the Mother God cult or whatever, they were really into the internet, and that's how they got a lot of their new members and spread their word and stuff like that. And so they have a ton of like home video footage, and it shows them like playing with her dead body, and someone would like wiggle her toe and be like, her toe wiggled, and it's like, yeah, because you wiggled it, dude. And that's going on in modern times. In modern times, schizophrenic alcoholics are starting cults with like multiple people while they die and turn blue. So during ancient times, is it possible that like some kids who didn't speak English turned green? I think so. Did I Are those two situations really that comparable? No. But if someone can turn blue, I think they can turn green. Is what I'm saying here. That's basically the ultimate conclusion that I'm coming to. If you can turn blue, you can turn green, dude. People turn red all the time. People turn purple from like severe sunburns and stuff like that. So I think if you can turn blue, you can turn green. Is all I'm saying here. That's all I'm saying. And people turn yellow. When you get jaundice or whatever, you turn yellow. So I think you can turn green. Anyway, I think you can turn green is the point of all this. So some folklorists claim that this is a story derived from a fairy tale where people would enter caves, and this is multiple fairy tales, and go into a lush other world which was not lit by the full light of the sun. So I guess in a lot of medieval, ancient, I think this is Celtic, maybe it's Germanic, I don't really know. But in some like European fairy tales, caves were often like a symbol of an entrance to another land. You know, like Hyperborea, if you've ever heard of, or Agartha. Agartha or Hyperborea. I think Agartha is the one I'm thinking about here. But Agartha, we talked about that a little bit with the Hanafi episode. But anyway, that's another. I'm pretty sure it's like a Scandinavian myth, but it's about a cave, and you go in the cave and there's a whole like inner earth in there and stuff like that. So that was a big thing, a big piece of symbolism, I guess, that existed in a lot of these fairy tales. And within the fairy tales that I guess existed around medieval England, the caves would often lead to a land that was like super lush and green and the sun never fully shone. And the one guy, so the girl Agnes herself said that they were just herding cattle, heard the loud noise, and woke up near the wolf pit. And but this other guy says they went into a cave first, and so I guess that's kind of where they're getting this idea that this is derived from a fairy tale is from this other story that this guy told, where the kids entered the cave before hearing the bells and coming out. But once again, the first-hand account of the girl who was there, of the green girl who was there, said there was no cave involved. So I don't know how much I believe this explanation. And then there's some other explanations, and so others claim it is a Martin Miss, which Martin Miss I guess was like All Hallows Eve, so like Halloween, beginning of November, around that time of year, story, and the beans represent the food of the dead. There, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of explanation there around that whole thing, because it's like it's not like the kids came back to life, or that they claimed that they had like seen the afterlife or whatever. So I don't know why the why the beans are, why they're being like, well, beans represent death, and it's like, but what does that have to do with this story? I guess is what I'm saying here. But Martin Miss is is a holiday, I guess, that they would celebrate around that time. Christian holiday named after Saint Martin, which would happen around the harvest time, and the kids are green and like plants are green. I guess that's the connection that they're drawing there. This one does make a little bit more sense to me, because once again, the kids say they came from St. Martin's, or the girl said she came from St. Martin's Lane. The boy didn't say anything. He died before he could learn English. Um, but they said they came from St. Martin's Land, and Martinmas is a celebration that would happen around the harvest time in medieval England and stuff like that. And so this explanation makes more sense to me than the first one about the fairy tales and the folklore regarding the caves that lead to an other world. And they also said that this other world that the caves led to was like fairies lived there and stuff like that. But these kids aren't fairies. They're They're just green. Right? They don't have wings or anything. They're not sprinkling pixie dust or whatever. They're just green. Like, even according to these superstitious, like, peasant villagers from that time, the kids were just green. They didn't have any magical powers or anything like that. But so yeah, the second explanation makes more sense to me. And then, like, a non-scientific explanation for it, which I think is kind of, or a non-fairy tale, a little bit more of a scientific explanation, sorry, uh, that one person had, or I guess a few people had, was, remember what I said at the beginning about the Anglo-Saxons and then the Normans and stuff invading England? One of the explanations was that this is a fairy tale, but it's not a fairy tale about Martinmas or these caves that lead to the underworld or anything like that. It's just like a fairy tale about the cultural and, like, ethnic differences between the native Celtic people, or the Celtic people that previously inhabited this area, and the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans and stuff like that. Right, the Germanic groups that ended up uh, conquering England and Scotland and Wales and stuff like that. That's their explanation for this. In terms of it, they're like, it is a fairy tale, but it's not a fairy tale about any of that other shit. It's a fairy tale about cultural and ethnic differences, which I think that's probably the dumbest explanation of them all, because this is 1000 AD in an area of England that I'm pretty sure was heavily controlled, and uh, the Normans and Anglo-Saxons had, like, established their populations there during this time. By the reign of King Stephen de Blois, the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans, these Germanic groups had pretty well eradicated or interbred with the Celts, or the Celts, and pretty well destroyed their culture and stuff, like, not fully destroyed it, but changed it a bit, we'll say. So I didn't write that down because I just thought it was so stupid. But this is a story about green kids, so we can't really count anything out, I guess. And so some modern explanation is that the children were Flemish immigrants from the nearby town of Forham St. Martin, and that they had a condition called hyperchromic anemia, which yellows the skin. So hyperchromic anemia, chromic has to do with colors. Hypo means you have a lot of color, or you have a lot of something. So I'm guessing hypo, a lot, chromic, color. So you have a lot of color. But I looked up the condition. I went to Google Images, and it does seem it has a little bit more of a jaundice look to it. Where it's more yellow as opposed to green, which is what the villagers said. There is, yeah, I don't know. And it's like a blood thing, right? That's what anemia is. Anemia is like a blood condition. Usually it's like you don't have enough red blood cells or whatever, but I guess it can just have to do with anything in regards to blood. So yeah, they're like, these kids were the children of Flemish immigrants, explains why they didn't speak English. They came from the nearby town of Forham St. Martin, explains why they said they came from St. Martin's Land, and they had hyperchromic anemia, which explains why they had this tint to their skin and eventually ended up losing it. But this explanation kind of, it explains those things, but it doesn't explain the cattle aspect of it, because they said that these Flemish immigrants that, like, basically, in Flemish, I think, is around, like, Belgium, maybe it's like Belgium, Netherlands, somewhere around there. So not the mainland of, or not the island or any of the British Isles or anything like that. But it doesn't explain the cattle, because apparently all or most of these Flemish immigrants to England were, like, cloth workers and stuff like that. And so that means that they would be living in the city, probably living in, like, tenant housing and stuff like that. So it's like, how would they have cattle, right? They weren't cattle farmers, they were cloth workers, right? They worked in, like, textile mills or whatever, which I don't even know if they had textile mills back then, but they worked with cloth, not cows. So it explains basically everything except the whole cow part of it, right? And also, how would the kids get hypochromic anemia? Because I'm pretty sure, just pure guessing here, that that's like a condition that comes from eating only like plants and stuff like that. So how would they end up with this condition? I don't know. Explains a lot of things, doesn't explain everything. It does seem like the most likely scenario to me about how these kids ended up here. I don't think that there was a cave involved. I'm not super familiar with the topography of England, but yeah, I think just forget about the cave. All right, remember the girl herself, Agnes. She didn't even mention a cave. She was just like, we heard a loud noise and we ended up near this wolf pit. So forget about the fucking cave. Cave, moot point. Cows, not a moot point, because the girl said she was herding the cows with her brother and stuff like that. So yeah, the final explanation, it's probably the truth, or probably close to the truth, but doesn't fully explain everything about the mystery of this. Which, once again, to me, the mystery isn't whether or not it happened. It was what, like, how did it happen? I guess is the mystery of all this. But that's their explanation for this, and it does make sense. During medieval times, people weren't traveling a whole lot. So this place, Forham St. Martin, it's not super far away from Woolpit. Um, but so it's reasonable that the kids could have walked from Forham St. Martin to Woolpit, and it's also possible that just because of how limited the spread of information and just like travel in general was during that time, that these people didn't that the people of Woolpit didn't know about all the Flemish immigrants who had moved to Forham St. Martin. So that makes sense to me. Hypochromic anemia, I'm kind of on the fence about that one. It's like, yeah, it turns yellow, but it's not quite green, but I'll buy it. So a lot of it makes sense to me. All right, so our second mystery. Like I said, we're doing two mysteries today. One, Green Children of Woolpit. The second one we're going to be talking about, I had heard of the Green Children of Woolpit, but I didn't know about all that shit involved with it. Didn't know the story. I just knew some green kids showed up in England. The second one we're going to talk about is the Lost Ships of Zheng He. We're going to specifically talk about one expedition or one detachment of lost ships from Zheng He. And I learned about this in, like, I don't know what, sometime, maybe it was like freshman, sophomore, junior, I don't remember. Somewhere around that time in high school, our a history teacher we were learning about the history of China. And one day in class, he showed us this documentary. It was about the Ming Empire or the Ming Dynasty, but it was about this specific dude, Zheng He, or Zheng He is another way to pronounce it, who was a important guy in the Ming Empire. And yeah, we'll talk about the differences between the Ming and the Qing dynasties. I keep saying Ming Empire, it's Ming Dynasty, but we're going to talk about like the differences and some of the conspiracy about those differences and stuff like that. Anyway, so Admiral Zheng He of the Ming Dynasty was a Muslim eunuch who is often considered the greatest admiral in Chinese history. So, yeah, there was a lot of Muslims in China, I guess, during that time. And I guess the Ming Dynasty was pretty chill with them. And another important thing about China is that there was a lot of like, I guess, independence movements and stuff like that, and it wasn't always like a big cohesive empire, especially when you get out to Western China, Tibet, Jiangxing and stuff like that. It wasn't super cohesive, and it still really isn't. China's trying hard. They're trying hard to genocide the Uyghurs and beat Tibet into submission and stuff like that. They're trying hard to do that, but during this time, those places did have a little bit more control. But anyway, that's not really important to the story. Anyway, this guy Zheng He or Zheng He, he had another name originally. It was like Ming He or some shit like that, but he ends up changing his name to Zheng He, and he was basically raised from a little boy within the nobility of the Ming Dynasty. So there was some war going on. I guess the Han Chinese were trying to conquer like the whatever group lives out in Western China, and they found this kid, and they ended up making him an admiral, cut his balls off. That was a big move back then, back in the day, especially in China. China loved their eunuchs, although eunuchs existed in other places, and they would do that to basically like beat them into submission or to like make them more docile and submissive and stuff like that. But obviously, he's one of the greatest admirals in Chinese history. So I guess maybe it did make him more docile or submissive, but it also didn't make him that docile and submissive because he probably killed a lot of people. But anyway, he served as a military commander before going on 7 state sponsored voyages to establish diplomatic relationships and imperial prestige. So this wasn't necessarily colonization, but it was being like, hey, we're China, we're the shit, we rule hard as fuck. We're not gonna fully colonize you and like take your resources and stuff like that, but just know we're here. That was kind of the point of these missions. They weren't like purely like diplomatic friendly missions, but they also weren't expeditions of conquest and imperialism and stuff like that. It was more so being like, look, just give us some money, give us some gold, giraffes. I remember that was a big thing that Zheng He brought back, like a ton of giraffes from Africa, and he went all the way to Africa. This is a confirmed historical fact that he went all the way to Africa. And so yeah, that was kind of the point of these missions. Wasn't trying to conquer anything. We're not going to talk about his military history at all, but he is considered the greatest admiral in Chinese history, or one of the greatest admirals in Chinese history. And so I guess I'll explain a little bit about the Ming versus the Qing dynasties. So the Ming dynasty they were really big into like exploration and expansionism and trading with the outside world and stuff like that. They weren't isolationist at all. But then something happens, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but something happens, and then the Qings get in charge, and the Qing dynasty was straight up isolationist. They did not want to trade with anyone, they didn't want to explore. It doesn't seem like they had a whole lot of interest in expanding their territory. And the Ming dynasty was sometime before 1600s. The 1600s is when the Qings take over. But the Ming dynasty was before that. And the Qing dynasty went all the way up to like almost World War One. It lasted like 300 years. I think it ended in 1912, if I remember correctly. But the Ming dynasty, they were big fans of exploration and stuff like that. And then they stopped being fans of exploration. And then the Qing dynasty takes over and fully goes full isolationist, China only. China's going to take care of itself. We're not going to trade. We're not going to be dependent on anyone else. And we're just going to do our own thing. So that's kind of the differences between the Qing and the Ming. And so Zhang led voyages which often had 200 to 300 massive ships, and he reached as far west as Kenya and as far east as eastern Indonesia. So when we talked about the Magellan thing, we talked about Malacca, which is this area in Indonesia where all the spices come from, or a lot of spices come from. And Zheng He was fucking around there, but he also went all the way to Africa, across the Indian Ocean a few times. And when I say massive ships, these ships were like 5 times the size of the ships that Christopher Columbus used to cross the Atlantic to reach the New World. Like, these were huge, like they had gardens on them. That's how big these ships were. Like, I think, maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but they were gigantic, fucking huge, like the size of like modern ships and stuff like that. And they were made out of wood. I think they were like at the time the biggest ships ever built. So these ships were more than capable of handling huge waves, open ocean, choppy conditions, and stuff like that. Like the European exploration ships, they were big, but they weren't as big as these ships. They were kind of more so built for like speed and being able to use the wind to their advantage. Whereas the Chinese ships, they were big, but they didn't, and so because of that, they weren't able to use the winds and stuff like that. And so that's going to be important when we're talking about our theory, which I guess I'll just come out and say it. The theory is that Zheng He, or a break off from his expeditions, one of his expeditions, circumnavigated the globe and discovered the New World like 70 years before Christopher Columbus did. That's our theory that we're going to talk about here. So, and we're going to talk about, and the ships are important for that. So anyway, so because the fleets were so large, there were often detachments that would conduct anti-piracy. They would map coastlines and they would collect tributes. So there was a ton of, like, constantly these big expeditions. Zheng He would be like, all right, go fucking find me a lion or whatever, right? I don't even know what a lion is, but go find me one. Okay. There was a ton of detachments. So that's obviously going to be important. Obviously, the theory is that one of these detachments broke off and circumnavigated the globe and got lost or whatever, and that's how they ended up circumnavigating the globe. But so a lot of, and once again, 200 to 300 ships. So Christopher Columbus crossed the ocean with 3 ships that were like not even close to the size of any of Zheng He's ships, and he did it. So a detachment of, I don't know, 10 ships, we'll call it, that are at least twice the size of Christopher Columbus's ships. I don't think it's unreasonable, but we'll talk about some of the more fine details later on. So official records of these voyages were kept in what was called the Ming Shilu, or Shila. I don't know, I can't read my own handwriting, but they kept official records of it, and this means the veritable records of the Ming court. And so they're pretty solidly taken as fact. You know, this is like 1400s, 1500s time, so there's a little bit more faith in the historical records from this time. But massive gaps exist in the records due to Qing anti-exploration sentiments. Like I said, remember, the Ming, they do end up stop exploring and stuff like that and kind of do their own thing. But the Qing were like fully, we don't fuck with that shit at all. And so this is kind of the start of our conspiracy here, is that the Qing destroyed records of, destroyed some of the Ming Shilu records of a detachment of Zheng He reaching the New World, so that people wouldn't be like, oh, well, there's 2 continents that are not completely up for grabs, but they're there. There's 2 continents that, like, the rest of the world doesn't know about. Like, we could go do that shit. The idea is that the Ming destroyed the records in order to prevent people, probably not like peasants, but people within the nobility, people within the bureaucracy, people with power, from being like, we should go see what's going on over there. Because the idea is that, yes, this detachment from Zheng He did end up reaching the New World, but they didn't stay there. They were just trying to get back to China. So yeah, that's kind of the start of our conspiracy, is that the isolationist Qing dynasty was like, fuck no. We cannot let people know about this. If people know about this shit, then they're going to want to go over there, and that's not what we're doing. You know, we ain't doing that shit. The Qings don't play like that, okay? Qings stay at home. Qings fucking just farm rice all day. We ain't going to the New World. We don't need cocoa beans. We don't need, corn and shit like that. We got rice. Fuck it. We're not going to the New World. We got all the spices we need in, the Malacca area and stuff like that. We ain't going to the New World. That is the explanation as to why these gaps in the record exist, is because the Qing were just so anti-exploration, so isolationist, that they destroyed a lot of records, including the records of discovery of the New World. So there's solid archaeological evidence of lost and wrecked Ming ships off the coast of East Africa, but one historian who is also a naval officer in the Royal Navy in the UK, his name is Gavin Menzies, he claims that one detachment reached the Americas. And so yeah, this everything we're going to be talking about is his theory. His book is called like 1421, some shit like that. It's called like 1421, The Real Discovery of America. I don't know. Just look up his name and you'll find the book. But he believes that they ended up reaching the Americas. Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing else to say until later on in the notes. But there is a lot of lost Ming Zheng He ships, I guess, is the important part of this bit of the notes, is that they did have a fair amount of ships that they just couldn't account for. Remember, 200 to 300 pretty big ships. A few of them are going to get lost, and there is just archaeological proof. It's not evidence, it's 100% proof that there was a lot of Ming ships, that Zheng He ships specifically, that wrecked off the coast of East Africa. And so Menzies proposed that a detachment rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached the Caribbean in 1421 before crossing the Pacific to go back to China. So his idea is they get to like East Africa, they go down around the tip of Africa, cross the Atlantic, get up to the Caribbean, go down around that coast like Brazil, Argentina, and stuff like that. Go through the Drake Passage, I believe it's called, between the tip of South America and Antarctica, and then cross the Pacific back to China. So he's not just saying that they reached the New World. He's like, they circumnavigated the globe, 100 years before Magellan, and they reached the Americas 70 years before Christopher Columbus, is what he's saying here. And this is also rounding the Cape of Good Hope. That was done by the Dutch in the 1600s, I believe. So that's kind of crazy to me to think about, the fact that we, as humanity, reached a new continent before we like fully went around another continent. I don't know. It's pretty fucking crazy to me. I don't know. Maybe it's super hard to round the Cape of Good Hope or whatever. I know there's a lot of bullshit down there. Like especially in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there's like a lot of problems. I remember we talked about that in the Magellan episode. There's like a ton of fucked up ocean currents or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of crazy to me. That just historically we discovered the New World before we went around Africa. I don't know. And so, once again, remember that these ships that Zheng He was using, they did use the wind. They had sails and stuff like that, but they relied a lot on ocean currents. And Gavin Menzies is like, dude, it's more than possible that they could have caught like an ocean current that went to the Caribbean and then caught another ocean current that took, like, the currents are there. It's possible that these ships could have used these currents to take this path, is basically what he's saying. And so he claims that there's evidence of massive dry docks in the Caribbean and that Chinese maps predate European cartography of North and South America. So he uses like satellite imagery, and I guess if you use the satellite imagery, it kind of looks like there might have been dry docks that the Chinese used to repair their ships, and that does make sense to me, at least a little bit, that this detachment wasn't sent out on purpose, that they kind of got lost and that their boats kind of got fucked up, and they kind of let their ships be just carried, because that's the only option, right? It's not, you're in the middle of the ocean, it's not like you can fucking hop off the ship and just walk or whatever. So he's like, their boats were fucked up. They end up getting to the Caribbean, fixing their boats, and then going back down around and getting back to China. Once again, this is all physically feasible. Like I said, not a ton of historical evidence for it, but physically it's feasible. Because remember, Magellan got fucked up a lot during his circumnavigation of the globe. And he didn't even live through the whole thing, but his boats got fucked up. He had to he got shipwrecked, or one of his boats at least got shipwrecked in Argentina or Chile or some shit like that, and they had to find a new mast for it. I think it was something like that. So this is all feasible, physically at least. But other historians claim these maps lack verifiable origin, like they don't know exactly when they came from, and that they reflect Islamic and European geographic knowledge from the 16th century. So there are these maps, these Chinese maps of the New World, do exist, but carbon dating isn't exact. You can't, or radiometric dating or radioisotope dating, I don't remember what it is. It's not an exact science. And so yeah, they're just being like, the Ming-Shi Lu records don't exist, or Ming-Shi La, I don't remember. Records are gone. There's no, the veritable records of the Ming court about reaching the New World don't exist. So yeah, that's basically their evidence for this not happening. And also the maps not being 100% dated to that time. But anyway, Genzi's believed that after the completion of the Forbidden City, which that was done by the Ming Dynasty, uh, that the completion of that caused the abrupt end of the maritime program, and all records regarding world-spanning exploration were destroyed. So that's the conspiracy aspect of this. Physically, is it possible? Yes. Do we have enough evidence to support this in any way, shape, or form? No. That's kind of the conclusion about that one. We'll never really know. I think is what we're coming to with that one. But yeah, those are our two history's mysteries. I'm kind of out of things to say. I hope everyone listening to this has a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Ping.